Hi, Thad.
Howdy.
How you doing?
Pretty good. You?
Pretty good.
That does not sound convincing.
This is just my favorite topic. It's so easy.
Hmm.
Call in from a number ending in 4679. Do you mind revealing your identity, 4679?
Yes. Hi, this is Kendra Kleinschmidt from Eagle County. My internet's out at the moment, hoping it's coming right back so I can join regularly.
Okay. Well, good luck with that. And I think we've got a pretty critical mass here. I just want to start off and say I apologize for the last minute scheduling of this. I had sent the email and the calendar invite out earlier in the day, and then at about 4:30, I realized that none of my emails from the entire day had been sent out. Um, so I think this will be one of many conversations to come. And I'm, maybe even have kind of a secondary meeting to continue the discussion, especially with folks who couldn't make it. And I'll probably put together some sort of summary on that and share the recording with the CHSDA team to kind of provide out. So there's kind of two closely related items that are bringing us all together. And sorry, for Human Services friends that don't know, my name's Katie First. I cover HHS policy for CCI, and am the lobbyist. So I work with the legislative committee very, very regularly, but I know not all of you are involved in that. So there is language in an interim committee bill that makes some references, and I'll put that language in the chat, to courts ordering the filing of a DNN petition, as well as ordering investigations to occur. That is pretty narrowly focused on cases related to competency for juveniles. However, many of you probably remember the Raise the Floor bills that have come out in 2023 and 2022. And my understanding is that those same proponents have lined up sponsors who are running the bill again in the 2025 legislative session. So that is kind of what brings us all here today to kind of talk about this, have a little bit of a philosophical discussion about these youth in conflict cases and across child welfare and juvenile justice. I know I'm joined by Emily Hansen, who's the legislative liaison, so my counterpoint from the Colorado Department of Human Services. Emily, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, are you able to share anything about the state's feelings on this language from the interim committee bill that I just put in the chat?
Yeah, and no worries putting me on the hot seat for this one. I think really when we were looking at this bill, there's a lot in here that we care about just on the competency side, and that's really specific to the work that we are doing at CDHS around competency and restoration and evaluations. But we did flag the section that you all are looking at, and I think really we wanted to make sure that we were checking in with you all on what your thoughts. I think Katie, a lot of what you kind of gave the outline for was what had piqued our interest. We were kind of surprised too, because when we got the bill request for a fiscal note, I don't think you all were on it. I know that there was maybe some initial outreach from Jack Johnson to you all on this bill, but it didn't go out to you all from a fiscal note standpoint. And that was sort of another thing where we're like, this is like definitely, and there's a lot of policy stuff. I think that, and fiscal analysts aren't as deep in the weeds on the policy pieces, but it definitely was something we were wanting to dig in more and really see where you all were coming from, or if you guys had some notes on it. I haven't been able to go through any of our specific ideas or work with the governor's office if they have any preferences as far as where they'd want the department to land on this one. To be honest, there's a bunch of bills coming out of this committee that have a pretty big impact on the work that we do at CDHS. So I think we're happy to join the conversation. I think we recognize too that this is probably not a one and done conversation, knowing all of the levers being moved and pulled going into this next session.
Thanks, Emily. That's helpful. And then there's also a group of county attorneys, many of which who are able to join as well. They just had a meeting and started talking about this as well and have shifted over to our meeting. So Jen M, can I also put you on the spot and maybe just share a little bit about like some of the uniqueness of this bill, but then kind of how it plays into this larger raise the floor JJ discussion, and maybe what the county attorneys covered.
Yeah, I can try to do that. And feel free, my colleagues, to jump in to correct things or add on to it. I think we started to have the same discussion that the directors have already started to have is, a child being found legally incompetent to proceed under a juvenile delinquency case. Is that really our population of children to serve? And legal competency is very different than child abuse, neglect, or even beyond control of parent behavior. And so I think that's where we started our discussion and talked about really the way this language is written. It's about non-compliance with the management plan. It doesn't implicate anything larger than that. And I think our initial thoughts are, we aren't the people to enforce compliance with the management plan, but also recognize that the pieces that are identified there as possible things that could happen in terms of ordering a department to investigate and file a DNN, those are legally options available to the court now. So I think we were just starting to have the discussion around these two concepts have been pushed together that are not actually interrelated, but this bill is trying to do that. Anything else anyone would add or correct?
That's helpful. Thank you. So I think knowing that this ability for the court to file or order the county department to do an assessment and file a DNN, but it is still up to the county really on whether or not they want to prosecute. I think it would be a helpful conversation to start off with. If you all could kind of share, like, does your court in JJ cases order assessments, how do you treat those, and kind of what happens from there? If folks are willing and able to share.
I'm happy to share, Katie. Yes, our courts can order us to do an assessment. We try to convince them not to order it, just ask and we'd be happy to do it. But they can order an assessment and our staff take that quite literal. So they'll go out and assess and see what all services the family has had or hasn't had, what they feel like maybe could be helpful. And then present that back to the court as a recommendation that here's what we believe could be helpful, here's what we could help with, here's what we think they could probably receive from CYDC if they're already involved with CYDC. We partner with CYDC in those assessments to negotiate and determine, is this something you already can do and you have the funding to be able to do it? And if the answer is yes, then our recommendation is that we don't get involved. They've got what they need and the CYDC is in agreement that they've got what they need. Occasionally, the court will order us to file a DNN. We try to be very proactive and involved so it doesn't come to that, so that it's our recommendation that a DNN needs to be filed and that we will be filing. But so we try to avoid them just ordering it, and especially ordering it before an assessment's been completed.
Thanks, Ruby. I'm seeing some head nods.
Yeah, I would say only
but-
so this is this, that, and learn. I would say oftentimes, especially for the non-competent kids, oftentimes we have been ordered to assess the family in the PA4 case, and then we're part of the process and helping to identify them maybe being non-competent, right? So it's not a result of them ordering us after the fact, it's us being on the front end. So that is a component. I am curious, Ruby, how CYDC actually has any ability to fund anything. Once they found non-competent, they're not really in their realm, right? So maybe you're talking more
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I was talking just globally.
just
in
globally,
that.
yeah.
And typically, you're right, it's in that assessment process that people start questioning competence and like, I don't know about this. But then if that is determined, oftentimes we kind of find ourselves in limbo then, like, well, we're not
Yes,
sure
right.
what we need. The child doesn't need placement to become competent, but what do they need and how and who kind of does that?
Yeah, for us, it becomes a complex. Our juvenile justice court orders a case management plan and orders us to monitor that case management plan through the JD case, not through a filing of a DNN. And so that's how we manage it. And these are often the kids that have so many other behaviors that they are borderline high acuity kind of kid, right? So that are nearly impossible to manage oftentimes because you don't have the accountability of the justice system. You have a lot of behavior. They have the IDV functioning that's kind of playing in there. So it becomes oftentimes a very difficult population to manage. And ultimately, so I find it interesting that they want us, I find it interesting in the statute to talk about, and if the parents aren't doing what they're supposed to do, but what oftentimes we ask the courts to order parents to do something in the JD case, and the courts won't do it there, but here in this situation, they have the authority to do it. So if that feels like a little bit of a miss in how cases are treated differently from a non-competent in a JD case versus a JD case that is competent.
Ruby or Thad, not necessarily in these competency cases, but more generally when you are ordered by the court, probably just to do an assessment. Even anecdotally, do you find that these are children or families that you are already aware of?
For the vast majority, we've had history as CP for sure. You're muted, Ruby.
Yep, I saw that. But sometimes we're aware of them before they even were ordered. And in those instances, we try to appear at court and try to go on record that we're already involved, we already know, we're already working on an assessment. But to Thad's point, I would say 85% of the time, there's been some type of child welfare history in this young person's past.
Annie, jump in.
So I would just add that I think it's really interesting what Thad and Ruby were just talking about, the flow between what's ordered in a JD case versus JV, because in small and medium counties, it gets so messy because we don't have these cases often that we don't know which one has the lead role. And even though we try to work through a crossover youth plan, like it just really stays in a very open space. And so there's no clear definitions of who needs to provide those services, who's doing this report, who's doing that. And I think having some of that language in there also continues to complicate it, and it doesn't define it for two separate roles for a JD and a JV case. So just throwing that out there too.
I would just add to that, it's a little complicated in our county too, only because our magistrate is the same magistrate. So the same magistrate hears DNNs that hears JV cases. And so she tends to blur the lines a lot about what's what. I do think though that sort of the bottom line is it really doesn't matter if you have those clearly delineated or not. I mean, I think the statute's pretty clear that if a child's not successful in their delinquency case and it's ordering needing placement, they can order us involved.
Yeah, for us, if we're doing placement, they're not, at least ours are not ordering a filing a DNN. We're just doing the placement and the custody through the delinquency case, not triggering a DNN. But I know other counties, that's different for some counties, I think.
If it's different than your experience, anyone on this call, I hope you'll jump in, because I think that is something that I think we're hoping to kind of learn and parse out of like Annie, it's really interesting to hear that like the definitions and the roles and the responsibilities being so blurred is part of the problem you all have. And is that a Pandora's box we need to open? But just knowing that, like, knowing some of these rubs and knowing that every JD is very unique and treats these cases uniquely, that's what's helpful to hear. So please
Well,
share.
I was going to say, to Thad's point, when he was talking about placement and how they can handle that through the JD case, our judge prefers it to be in a JV case, right? And so then there's that piece of it, because I think in their mind, it's more managed. The family and the youth are more managed, and there's more control there, when essentially we're trying to say, no, we can do this over here. But yeah.
This is Heather Walker from Weld. I mean, I would agree for the most part with what everyone's saying. I think the complexities are what brings so many different players to the table. And then no one, like Annie said, no one has clear roles or definition of who's doing what, which then it just ends up on the department's plate essentially. And I mean, sometimes we're not always the greatest at everything, right? Like sometimes we're just really good at what we do most. And I think that's probably the biggest part for Weld, that we have a magistrate right now that wants us to do everything, like literally wants us involved in every situation, whether it's competency or just helping a parent out. I mean, really, it's on the JD side, it's been really difficult for us. So adding in language like this, even though I know that it's already in statute that they can do that, I mean, he's even approaching right now reasonable efforts in a JD situation, which I don't think is in the law. So that's why I'm a little more skeptical about kind of where this is headed and kind of what it looks like, because I don't feel like our bench is on board 100% of the time with what the law is meant for or what it's saying. And so they take it and kind of do their own thing. And then we're held to that standard essentially of whatever their understanding of the law is. So any kind of consistency between courtrooms and court, that's really where my advocacy will be, and ensuring that it helps families ultimately, because they're the ones who get stuck then. And then you add the Ray a whole nother entity, or you add whoever's doing the competency evaluation to that. I mean, families are, you think we get confused? I mean, I just feel terrible for families and youth who have to go through some of these processes that we are even struggling with. So any legislation moving forward that kind of muddies the water even more, I'm super concerned about.
Oops, I appreciate what Heather said, and I think back to the CCI conference where Jen Mollenbach and Mike Valentine sort of presented the statute. Seemingly clear, but then I think Heather raises a really good point where it isn't so clear, or where, like to Thad's point, where things sort of get mushed together and then it becomes unclear. I almost wonder, like, just an exercise for us, if trying to unpack this might help us a little, like using what Jennifer and Mike put together might help us a little bit to give even better feedback around like possible changes or whatever to this piece of legislation. I don't know what others think about that, but it does feel like things get thrown in and sometimes they don't get thrown in the right place. And so then we trip over it because it doesn't make sense.
Heather Durasco.
Well, Barb, did you want to respond to what Ruby just said first? And then I can go.
No, I'm actually ready to go to the CMP component.
Okay.
I will wait for you.
Thank you. Okay. So my question, I just want to come back to Jen's report out about the county attorney discussion. So specific to this bill language. So Katie, I know you're going to check in with the committee chairs tomorrow morning. If I am hearing what Jen said right, the language is kind of confusing two separate concepts and pushing them together. So one is if a child's just found legally incompetent to proceed under the JD case, that's not within child welfare responsibility if non-compliance with the management plan. And so is that kind of the direction for tomorrow, at least on this piece, that Katie, you want to bring to the committee chairs around like helping them understand why this language doesn't make sense in this section and why it's two separate pieces of statute? I just kind of wanted to bring it back around on this item to kind of wrap up what you thought your next steps were for tomorrow.
You know, I feel like the county attorneys kind of had a very similar discussion as to what I think you all would have about like philosophically, like what is the role of child welfare here? And how much acknowledgement of the court's ability to order a DNN to be filed is allowable. And should there be some sort of reference to the judge can order a DNN if they suspect that there is abuse and neglect, but are they really the best ones to decide? Or should that be based off of the assessment from the county? And then it was 258. And so I jumped over here. So I think in part, and I think this is kind of also what takes us to like a bigger discussion on the legislative side is this kind of narrow reference in this bill okay, but maybe when we get to raise the floor or something like that, that's when we have kind of a bigger discussion and we're providing more substance on how to treat these cases and kind of where we think it is or is not appropriate. And also, yes, beyond control of the parent, which I think is also an undefined term. Yeah. Barb, I know you want to talk about the CMP piece. I won't forget you, but Summer, did you have something on that?
Yeah, I think it was just based on what you just said, Katie, and I wasn't at the last county attorney call, so I just wanted to clarify something that I might be misremembering that I thought Jen M mentioned. That the specific language in this bill says investigate, and that the definition of that term is not, is that correct? It says, let me pull it up. The court may alter the management plan, take other limit, ordering a Department of Human Services investigation pursuant to, and then the section number. I guess my question it was, I thought I heard on the county attorney call that that didn't necessarily mean that there was a DNN. Does that mean a referral to Red Team? Does that mean an assessment has to take place? Like, what does that particular language require of child welfare? And did you guys discuss that? I apologize if I missed that because I joined late.
We haven't discussed that. I think some counties might have a difference of opinion about that as well. My understanding is some people take these ordered assessments and put them through Red Team and decide they meet criteria and screen in or out. Some counties take a philosophy like mine that a court order is a court order and you're going to assess like the court says. So I think even that, Summer, is not entirely clear how it's interpreted.
Right,
And
thank
I
you.
would just add, I've seen written guidance from the State Department that says you can determine whether it meets criteria for an assessment. So I don't even think our supervisors are clear what that means.
So I guess I think where this leaves us a little bit is, you know, like philosophically, how do you as child welfare experts believe these cases should be treated? You know, Heather, I know you all have talked a lot about DEI and child welfare, and you have kind of a policy statement, if you will, on that, but what are people's thoughts? And I do just want to say that obviously like funding is its very own particular piece in all of this that adds complications. And Heather, do you want to touch on anything else just based off of the discussion from Ledge Committee on that?
I think definitely want to touch on the CMP part of it too, and maybe we come back to this, Katie, but yeah, if we want to keep looking at that language, I think for me, there's like the narrow conversation about this bill language and where it would fall under statute, being specific to a child found legally incompetent who is in non-compliance with the management plan. And then there's some of the other larger implications related to other conversations where we often find all of a sudden there's language about referring to a county for other JD cases. So I'm trying to keep it a little separate as much as we can, but also think about the next steps for larger implications too. But if it's okay, maybe we talk about the CMP portion.
Yeah, go for it. Barb, you're up.
Thank you. See how patient I am? This has come up so many times, and my worries are the same worries under Raise the Floor, and how then this is interpreted or not interpreted about a referral to a local collaborative management program. It gives the insinuation that a CMP is an entity by which you make a referral to, and that entity is a service delivery mechanism, to which some, if not many, of our CMPs, including my own, is not. So if, say, a court were to order a kiddo and their family to a CMP, like there is no CMP to refer them to in Jefferson County. We have a very bold CMP, but it doesn't do that. And I believe that there are many counties who function the way we do that are not a service delivery entity. So I'm not sure what this means or how it would impact counties that don't have service delivery models, how we would stand those up, how we get those funded. So all of those worries, they were the same under Raise the Floor and certainly here as well.
Go ahead, Josie.
I agree with that. And although our CMP in Denver could take referrals in the same way, it is a voluntary service. It's optional for the family. They can be involved or not be involved. It's a support if they choose, but nobody is forcing anyone to be involved with a CMP and to receive services. So, you know, in that sense, even if it were doable across the state, if it really is a voluntary support, I'm not sure it would achieve what this is hoping for, which to me seems like more teeth. I'm not sure if it will achieve that.
Does anyone's CMP provide any direct services that could get referred to, or is it all, I know you have service providers at the table, but I just want to make sure that's a fair statement to say, like, across the board for the state.
I would say that just because of the limited amount of funding, that they're not providing direct services more often. It's that they're referring and looking for those service providers and funding to back that. So that'd be my thought.
Yeah, I was gonna echo that. It's the same. I mean, a referral could result in a family meeting, right? An ISST that could result in referrals to pay for some services, but it is a limit. It is a limited, very limited capacity to be able to fund a lot of services for a lot of folks. So this population is a relatively expensive, can be a relatively expensive population that would really drain any resource that would be available.
Deb, you've been so quiet.
I was eating my lunch earlier, so I would say that well, a lot of the smaller counties, the amounts that we're getting right now is about $80,000. So in order to have a coordinator of the services, if you are a county, and that's not how we've worked, we've always tried to keep a little bit of money so that we can not perpetuate our existence, but have backup and be able to continue to fund the coordinator position. But there were, at least initially, counties that spent all of the money that they received each year trying to help coordinate services, and it wasn't always the same amount. Depends on, and now all that has changed this year, but you're like that, there's not a lot of money. So it would be hard to stand up additional services based on other legislation, because in order to have the coordinator who has to do all the reporting and all of that stuff, where else are you getting the money? Unless you're a county that just happens to have some magical person providing a lot of money too. So I don't know, I put something else in the chat about like ours, just again, working to help coordinate services and prevent fragmentation and duplication of the current services, or if there was a way to refer to something. But as Josie, I think, said, it was voluntary. It's still voluntary. Everything is voluntary. So there's no teeth in working with the collaborative management program unless they do something else to make us be able to have teeth, I guess, which I don't want.
I also want to add that the way CMPs are structured right now, looking at mine, if I said, hey, this is now a population, or this is now a new piece that you have to manage, I don't think that they would say, this is what I want to do. And so would I lose partners at the table? Would they pull back? What would that look like? And I'm concerned about losing that collaboration with what we're already doing by adding that piece as well.
In order to have, I'm sorry, Summer, I just jumped in. In order to have a CMP, you have to have all those different partners at the table. So if you start losing those partners, then you don't actually have a CMP.
I was just going to mention that these were all the same. This is all the same information that we shared during the Raise the Floor conversation with the proponents that didn't have any impact on their views of what they wanted to bring forward. And I only say that because, you know, Rep. Amable sits on the interim committee that brought forward this particular language that we're discussing now. And she has said that she's bringing back the Raise the Floor bill, calling it youth deflection, as you've all heard, and that there would be 3 levels. And I just wanted to mention it because she's talking about teeth at one of the levels. So she's saying the 3 levels would be, and she won't share a draft. She won't share what, we haven't seen anything, but has said that one level would be no involvement with the juvenile justice system whatsoever, not even picked up or whatever, the youth in terms of the Raise the Floor bill. Second level might be something like, she's saying requirement of the CMP to serve, like back like they did with Raise the Floor, but that there would be a level within that that could be a, she called it a backstop, that where the juvenile justice system would come in. Again, I don't understand that, didn't share the details. Then this other level where that youth would, for certain exceptions, they would broaden it beyond murder. And for those other exceptions beyond murder would go into the juvenile justice system. And that's how she described it. We haven't seen anything other than that or any other details, but I only mention that because these all seem interrelated. And I see, you know, Representative Molly running for her Senate seat, that she sees herself as the lead on these concepts. And at least her tone and tenor with Boulder County has been like, you know, I don't care that there's not that, or they should be able to do that, or we don't, you know, it doesn't matter if you don't have funding, you can find the funding. That's been her approach on some of these discussions. So I'm just keeping that piece in mind as well as we're discussing here.
Oh, that's helpful, Summer. And I wanted to ask you too, I know Boulder has one of the more robust, unique CMPs. Are there any direct services provided, or is it all still kind of through the partnerships that you're able to refer services out to?
I'm gonna have to get back to you on that, but my understanding is it's similar to what someone else here put in the chat around taking referrals, and then one of the partner agencies providing those services, and also using funding potentially to contract, also having contracts to cover services. But the CMP, it again, is always a collaborative, right? As everyone said on this table, that the entities are choosing to be there.
Sure. Barb?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of go back to that how referrals would come in. And again, I don't know if Jeffco is just that different from how everybody else might be doing CMP. So we have the 19 plus partners at the table. It's very robust. It's wonderful. But the goal of our CMP has been for how do those community partners work together to lift up programs within the community. It's not a place that we take referrals on kids. So again, I don't know, if, like maybe we're the only one and I was just mistaken about that. If that is, and that is what last year's language, that is how I interpret this year's language here, is that it's a place to send a family, even if it's just for referral. Like that's not how our CMP functions. It's still very much community-based, it's partnerships, it's collaboration, it's wonderful, but it's not that.
Ours is the same. So they would not, you would send a referral and it would go to thin air. So.
Can I chime in, you guys? This is Sarah, and I'm so sorry I'm in the car, so it's hard for me to comment. Couple things. At RCMP, we do provide a little bit of service delivery. High fidelity wrap is one of our services. And likewise, I think that there's this misperception that CMPs everywhere just accept like self-referrals from families or, you know, from any entity in the community. And like Barb said, you know, we are not like that either. We accept referrals on high acuity youth from partner entities or through certain referral mechanisms. And so it's not just a kind of any, you know, come one, come all. When I checked in with the CMP coordinators on the kind of community referral form that came out of 1249 last time, that was this kind of introduction to like any of these entities can refer to any CMP by using this form. When I asked coordinators how they implemented that form, had they distributed it, had they trained on it, the overwhelming answer was no, because the statute required that a form be developed, but there was no specific implementation of it that I recall. And that's how everyone else kind of interpreted it as well. So the form got developed, but nobody uses it because we all have this very specific way that we serve CMP kids and families in our communities. And it's usually a very specific door and not, like I said, just this kind of, you know, community referral form.
Related to the raise the floor conversation, I keep coming back to if there's a clinical intervention needed, that's a behavioral health service that, like, if there should be a pathway just for community to refer through the BASO network moving forward. And why isn't that pathway being discussed in these instances, as opposed to them always going to child welfare if it's not JD involvement? And so that piece, like, as the BASO RFP is currently being reviewed and as those providers are selected, I'm just wondering if we can start asking questions about like how the referral mechanism would work and what that care coordination would look like on that end to capture some of these populations, because it feels like they should be focusing more on a behavioral health component through the community and through the public as opposed to a different intervention system.
Ruby.
Yeah, Heather, we were kind of thinking along the same lines. I'm thinking, as I read this, I'm really curious, what do folks think will happen with the referral to the CMP? So if they're just saying, you know, the judge can order a referral to the CMP, what's the expectation of what's going to happen? If, like in our area, what could happen is bringing families and partners and things together to have a meeting to say, okay, there's a struggle here. The court's asked us to all in our big collective and all of our partnerships to come to the table and talk about how we can help this family, and who can offer what and who can do what. If that's what their intent is, then maybe a referral to the CMP isn't a bad thing. But if their intent is to refer to the CMP for some type of service and service delivery and case management, that's where I commented that we're a lot like BARC. I mean, we have two staff people at the CMP. How would they manage all of that? And they don't have the funding to fund, you know, ongoing services and ongoing case management. Our CMP will often step in where there's a gap in funding, and use some of their funding for a time limited or in partnership with, 2 or 3 other agencies. We all sort of put in funding to bridge a gap or whatever's necessary. So that's, to me, that sort of is hanging out there, like, what's the expectation of a referral to a CMP?
It's a great question. Maybe I'll find out. Hopefully I'll find out tomorrow. Josie.
It was my question actually in terms of a court-ordered assessment to begin with, because when I'm reading through this, an assessment's already happened. They already have a plan in place. They already know what services are being recommended at the time, right? They're referring because of lack of compliance, not that they don't know what services are needed. So what's the role of that person to connect them to the resources that are needed, rather than referring to ask for a court-ordered assessment who doesn't know the family or may not know the family at all, versus, and also CMP. If they already have a management plan, they already have determined what services are needed, what's their role in helping get those services connected? I'm not sure what other entities would be able to do in that space that hasn't already been done, is a question that I had.
You're gonna make me sound smart tomorrow. Jill.
Josie, I feel kind of like the same question, only maybe even taking it a little bit further. And so how often, for those of you in the mix, just really doing this work, it seems like these are a version of the high acuity. How often does it come to bear that out-of-home placement is what needs to happen? And then who does that? Because our CMP doesn't have any ability to do out-of-home placement. But a lot of times, at least in our community, it seems like that can happen when we don't have compliance or follow through from the parents. But just wondering what other people are seeing. Will that happen? And who picks that up?
I'm just gonna jump in. I think to Josie's point, again, that could be interesting depending upon what their intent is. So if CMP is designed to stop fragmentation of service delivery, then maybe a referral, thinking that their ISST has all the community partners at the table, and clearly something's not working for this kid in their plan, maybe that's what they're thinking is, okay, you already have the mechanism to get all your partners at the table. Go do that and figure out what in the service delivery is not working, and if you can figure out a solution to it. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing again what they mean by that.
So does it happen that out-of-home placement never comes out of a CMP? Like they never say, oh, we're going to recommend out-of-home placement? Does that not happen?
At ours, no, not necessarily. I mean, we have instances where we've got, CYDC and probation and folks there, and we do what they're called faces meetings. It's basically a family meeting, families present with the youth, that everyone then becomes in agreement that child's behaviors are so beyond control, nothing else seems to be working, that maybe, and departments there too, placement is the answer, but it's not the CMP who's requesting placement, it's the department at the table, part of the conversation, agreeing that that's where we've landed because nothing else is working.
In our CMP, we with the department, as the department, may have an out-of-home placement recommendation. And I agree with Ruby. I do think that it's a good place to have a conversation about what's not working, and are there other community or partner services that could be added. I mean, I think about like when a kid is truant, we have a staffing to figure out, is there something in the family structure and the resources that needs to be addressed in order to get the kid to school? That same approach could be taken on a kid with competency management issues. And there are you know, there is potentially CCHA or the RAE at the table, or, you know, if it's a competency issue, we could invite the IDD case management entity. Is there an out-of-home placement option through a Medicaid waiver? You know, there are different things that could be explored. And I will just add that I don't think that using child welfare as a competency management enforcer is the right thing to do either. So I think if we take away the enforcement tone to it and more look at, you know, is the CMP and child welfare, human services as a partner able to help with a plan or help the family and youth, that's one thing. But enforcement, I think, is a little bit over the line.
Kendra.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to speak to a little bit as well, Sarah, because in Eagle County, when we think about the programming that's coming out of human services, I think about our collaborative management program in the realm closer to prevention, where we can think about it like that, although the children are already system involved, but that just generally means they're attending school, right? Because the school system is one system that's represented at the IOG. But I think where we would really run into problems is trying to use the CMP to hold families accountable, because it's that whole idea of these family meetings, which we call them, because individualized service and support team meetings is ridiculous, in my opinion. But the family meetings are supposed to be family driven, family led. That's the purpose, is to lift them up and allow them to lead the decision making. It's a very different feel when we're talking about non-compliance with some sort of JD treatment plan that I don't even know about as a child welfare professional. Like, that's not my space. So that would take new learning, new training, lots of support in order to effectively work with that population. It's very different from what's happening on our current CMP level.
These are all excellent points. And I think it is helpful for this immediate interim committee bill. Raise the floor, and its return is a little bit more complicated, and some are hearing more about what you know from Rep. Amabile is helpful. So I guess, and Heather Dorosco, feel free to jump in with your thoughts kind of on next steps. I'm happy to take these things back and see where we can modify the interim committee bill and that language as it is connected to competency. But I think kind of this philosophical question about the role of child welfare in these cases, and what do we ideally think it should be and look like, and where should these families, could they be served, should they be served? And then of course with that comes the funding and the service availability, in which case I say system of care. Does that, Heather, do you kind of agree that maybe that's like the subsequent conversation we have?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking, Katie, if you feel good with the information, there were so many really good comments today specific to the meeting you're going to have tomorrow related to the language in the interim committee bill. So you feel okay with that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I think focusing on that and trying to get that language modified, and then yes, with some raise the floor and just this broader piece around the population and where this is coming up, keeping that like separate for right now for you, your next step with this meeting tomorrow related to the bill.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think something that would be helpful to think about for future conversations is in what cases that you all are experiencing might child welfare already be involved, and kind of, I know, and obviously this is different, but the Senate Bill 71 report that came out about juvenile detention talked about that overlap. And obviously that's just detention, that's not general justice involvement. But it certainly didn't do us any favors, unfortunately. Ruby.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it creates a little angst when we talk about having a philosophical conversation, which is why I go back to the training that Jen and Mike did. And I'm wondering if Jennifer, you still have the slides from that training, it might be worth us all taking another review, because I do think that there is disagreement about where we should or shouldn't be involved in juvenile justice, but the statute is pretty clear. And so I want to just be careful that we don't wiggle around too much with what we philosophically feel like we should or shouldn't be doing. And it's probably something that's already in statute saying we must do. I just want to be sure that we're careful and clear on that. And then it'll help us to see where are the places that it's not already, and we do have the ability to push back or to, explain why that causes confusion or causes further system penetration or whatever the thing is. But I just know that not all counties think the same way about what we should and shouldn't be doing. And so then we do sometimes get into these big philosophical conversations about is that child protection, and do we belong involved? And no, it's not child protection, but the statute tells us we're going to be involved. So we just need to be careful.
One follow-up on that, Ruby, and for Katie, is the reason, Katie, we are hoping that to have that conversation is so that counties can be clear when legislators are going to change the statute this year to direct child welfare when to be involved. I guess that, I think it was your reason for having the philosophical conversation, because I think it would be helpful for the folks working with legislators to have a very clear response to more than just the confusion, I guess, why, specific instances would not require child welfare involvement, et cetera. Those kind of direct and clear examples.
Gosh, it almost sounds like a task force, which I don't know that anybody wants to do, but maybe. Maybe you just need to start from scratch. Okay, I am happy, Ruby, to try to get those slides from Jen if she has those. Okay, and can include that in some follow-up, and maybe we'll do something similar with a doodle to kind of have this philosophical subsequential conversation. Maybe the week of the 23rd or 30th, so you guys can all start thinking about it and somebody can come with the golden key. All right. Thanks, everyone. Unless anybody has anything else, hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Katie. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.